Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's the Chancellor's Distinguished Lecture that happens once every semester. If you have attended any in the past, we try to bring in higher education leaders who have a broad perspective on American higher education. And I'll be honest with you, I could not have landed a better speaker to speak about American higher education and the culture change and the transformation it has gone through and will go through in the years ahead than our speaker today. Dr. Freeman Hrabowski is our speaker. He has served as the president of University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, since 1992. He leads a university that has been recognized as a model for inclusive excellence by publications such as the US News, which in the past 10 years has recognized UMBC as a national leader in academic innovation and undergraduate teaching. Dr. Hrabowski advises national agencies, universities, and school systems about science and math education. In 2012, he was named by President Obama to chair the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans. The same year, he was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. More recently, he received the American Council on Education's Lifetime Achievement Award, the University of California, Berkeley's Clark Kerr Award, and the University of California, San Francisco's UCSF Medal. Earlier this year, Dr. Hrabowski was elected into the National Academy of Engineering for development of a national educational model for students from diverse backgrounds to excel in engineering and science. His TED Talk in 2013 highlights the 4 pillars of college success in science, and his most recent book, The Empowered University, examines how university communities support academic success by cultivating and empowering institutional culture. Let me now take a few minutes, I'll keep it short, but a few minutes to share my personal interactions and appreciation for Dr. Hrabowski. As you can see, he is wearing the right tie, I'm not, because he also received an honorary degree. The honors I listed were just a small fraction, amongst which is an honorary degree from the University of Michigan. And he reminded me that, that he remembers it. It was our current president, Mary Sue Coleman.
Yeah.
So it all comes back. Sure. So he's got the right tie. But I first got to know him when I was serving at the National Science Foundation. And we had invited him to give a lecture on a very successful program, which he is going to talk about. So that's the first time I met him. And then in 2009, I left the University of Michigan to go become the dean or a dean at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And there we had invited him to come and spend a day with us. He also received his PhD from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So what I remember after his lecture is 2 or 3 students in the audience who were all UMBC undergraduates were now doing PhD at University of Illinois. Of course, they were very eager to meet him, and I was there with them. And what I remember is this: Dr. Hrabowski remembered each of them by their names. Look, he is the president of the university. There are thousands of undergraduates leaving the institution. But one remarkable trait about Freeman is this: he remembers students because he walks through the campus and he is shaking hands with students. He is just so student-centered. And then I got to know him better, kept in touch with him. He has been a mentor, an advisor, an inspiration to me and many others in the country. And the last thing I'll share with you is he invited me to come and spend a day with him at UMBC. So I did that. I went, I spent the day, and that evening, they were welcoming a new class of students who would be in a special program to be preparing for PhDs. So that was the program. So it's a big hall, about 40 or so students were there. They were all seated. He and I walked in, he made me sit by the side, and then he did his introduction and so forth and gave me a chance to speak a little bit. I did. Those days I was the provost at Purdue. So I talked about, all of that. And then he asked every student to stand up, introduce themselves and their field of interest. What I remember is this: one student stood up, a male student, and said, at this point, I don't know exactly whether I'm going to go in for a PhD or master's. Dr. Hrabowski spoke to him. Very kind, very gentle way, but made him realize that this program, you are admitted, you're matriculated into this program because you are going on for a PhD. Don't take up a seat on this very important cohort if you have any doubts about going on for a PhD. Okay, he didn't say it this way. He said it very nicely, very gently, but the point was made that we take in students, we give them the full support, and they go on to shine in PhD programs at the best schools in the country. So he made it clear that this is the promise, and you better be prepared to deliver on that promise. So I just left UMBC and the day with him thinking, wow, I hope many other institutions would have this kind of an interaction between president and undergraduate students, graduate students, and so forth. So he is stepping down. This is his last year. And so Freeman, it is my honor, it is a privilege to have you be the speaker. And throughout the years, 10 plus years, yes, that you have been a mentor, been an inspiration, been an advisor, not only to me, but so many like me who are in American higher education today. So with that, I thank you and I invite you for the lecture.
Thank you. Thank you. And formally to Chancellor Dutta, to my friend Debashish, and I call Deba, I am delighted to be with you. And I commend you on being at Michigan-Flint, and I commend the university on selecting you. You have, I know, similar values, and you care about all students. And I start with that notion that as I talk today, I would like to be, in some ways, perhaps provocative. I hope in some ways inspiring, but I want to have a conversation that will allow us to then have questions and answers after the next 20 or so minutes. From your introduction, some might think I'm rather cruel in saying that to the student, and it wasn't said quite that way, but your point is well taken, and we can talk about that. Just as if you look at the 60 Minutes piece in that came out some years ago on the UMBC MAHA program, I had a lot of hate mail because the program, that the 60 Minutes piece mentions that we take their phones away. And I got letters from people saying, this is America, you cannot do that. Well, the people who suggested we take the phones away in the summer program were actually students from the summer before. And they said, if you want to build community among them, at least during the week, take their phones away so they get to know each other better and not simply high school friends. And it works well, though I still get some negative mail sometimes about that. The other point I would make is that I am from the Deep South, and we tend to be sometimes a little more intrusive in a student's life. Baltimore is what I call the Upper South. One day we think like Philadelphia, the next day like Richmond. But I grew up in Birmingham, and I will be interspersing a few stories throughout my talking today. I am from, as I said, Birmingham. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I was privileged to be a part of the Children's March. And even before that march, I had heard a story from my mother that I want to tell now, because you are a very special public regional institution serving that community. And there's nobility in that work. And I know from my experiences here in the Baltimore area, it's not easy all the time. There are challenges. Let's not sugarcoat that. And yet there is nobility in this work of transforming lives. And I want to tell you a story that I think is important for anyone working with young people, and maybe not so young, who may not have had all the advantages and who may still have some academic challenges. My mother grew up in a small town, in contrast to me, the big city Birmingham kid, in a small town called Wetumpka, Alabama. And as a child, she had to work in order to help the family. And she had a choice of working in a hot cotton field or working in a home as a child maid. And she preferred to be in that home because she wanted to see how rich people, what she considered rich people, live, rich white people. And the defining characteristic of the home was the library, at a time when there were no public libraries for children of color. This would have been back in the 30s. And interestingly enough, the woman was kind enough to my mother to say, when she saw her interest, her curiosity in the books, to say, let's choose a book for you, take it home, start reading it, and then let's talk about it. And then write me a few paragraphs about what you've learned. And all of a sudden, she began that relationship with this woman who taught her to love to read. Now, when my mother's girlfriends would see her at home reading, they would get upset. And they would say, this is not school time. You need to come out and play. And all of a sudden, she understood this growing distinction between herself and her girlfriends. And here it is. She said the more she read, the better a reader she became. And the better a reader she became, the more proficient, the more she enjoyed the experience. And the more she enjoyed reading, the more reading she did. She observed her girlfriends in school reading. They'd read with their lips. They didn't like it. They'd push the book aside and say, that's not interesting. And it became quite obvious. If you're really having a problem or difficulty reading, you're not going to like doing it. And it was at that point she decided she knew exactly what she wanted to do for the rest of her life, to become a teacher, and the teacher of English, of literature. And so all of my life, my philosophy and my thinking about the world, those things have been shaped by those early experiences with an English teacher, mother, who always was making the point about the importance of literature in the humanities in our lives. And I always begin with that because my background is math and stat, and people expect I'm going to be on one side thinking that way. And I am going to talk about some STEM, but I want to start with that context. And now, here is the point. Mother prepared me well to solve word problems, because as time went on, she became not only an English teacher, but a math teacher. She would quote Zora Neale Hurston, ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing until the watcher turns his head away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life, she would say, of men and of women. And the point to you today is that our entire reason for being in our institutions is to help students first to learn to dream about the possibilities, and then to make sure they have the skills, the mindset to reach the dreams. And unfortunately, some reach the dreams, others, in the words of Langston Hughes, see those dreams deferred. And there's our big challenge in broad terms. How do we help more students from Flint, Michigan, from this region, Baltimore, Washington corridor, to prepare for life through education? With that said, I'm a 12-year-old sitting in the back of church, not wanting to be there. My parents are placating me using the two things I love most. Food, I was eating M&Ms, the good kind with the peanuts, and math. I always loved math. And mother, who'd been an English teacher, and then when I went back to learn the new math, found one most important principle. She said, if you want to teach a little girl or a little boy to do math, word problems, teach them to read well. Because whether it's engineering or physics or chemistry or math, we don't express problems in numbers. We express problems in words. And so I was always having these word problems to work on. And I'm doing the word problems, and I don't want to be there, but this minister in the front at the lectern said, if the children participate in this peaceful protest, all of America will know that our young people know the difference between right and wrong, and they want a better education. And he said they'll be able to go to the better schools. Well, at that time, all of our schools were all Black. We had some wonderful teachers. They did not have the resources, and we were given the hand-me-down books after white kids had used them for years. It was an awful experience to know that the society considered us second class. And so all of a sudden I said, who is that guy? And they said, Dr. Martin Luther King. I went home, told my parents I had to go. They said, absolutely not. I told them they were hypocrites. At that time, you did not tell your parents they were hypocrites. Go to your room, boy. And the next morning they came in, I knew I was in trouble. And they just said this, it's not that we don't trust you. We don't trust the people who will be over you, because if you march, you're going to jail. I was 12. And they said, well, we prayed over it and we put you in God's hands. And I did go. It was a horrific experience. We were treated like animals, like slaves. And yet in the middle of the week, the parents and Dr. King came outside the jailhouse and said to all of us, what you do this day, he said, will have an impact on children who've not yet been born. And the world did change after that period in many ways. In one way, and most important, all of a sudden, within a matter of months, the little girls were bombed at the church in Birmingham. And I'm in that Spike Lee documentary on the 4 little girls, all the way to the assassination of President Kennedy, to the next year, when Lyndon Johnson was able to get the Civil Rights Act, the Higher Education Act, the Voting Rights Act passed. Why is that important today? Well, most people don't know, even educators, that only about 10% of Americans in the mid-60s had graduated from a 4-year institution, only 10%. Now, and at that time, everything was broken into black and white. For whites, it was 11%, for blacks, 3 to 4%, mainly at the HBCUs. Now, why is that important? Today, of course, we talk about all the different groups, and this is what we find. Surprisingly, still only 30% of Americans have actually earned a bachelor's degree. And it's broken down. For whites, it's about 37, 38%. For blacks, it's about 24, 25%. For Latinos, it's in the high teens. The highest educated group, the level of attainment would be Asians, however, Asian Americans. However, it depends on the Asian group. But overall, it's a little over 50%, because many come here to grad school and then their kids are here. And that makes the difference. Put it together, though, 2/3 of Americans have not seen anyone across races, anyone in their family graduate from a 4-year institution. That usually surprises people, particularly educated people, because they would say, Freeman, that couldn't be true. Everybody I know is educated. Well, yeah, lawyers know lawyers, professors know professors, engineers know engineers, and physicians know physicians. And plumbers know plumbers, and plumbers can make a good living. What is my point? That we sometimes forget that we've been in a society where most people didn't have a college degree. In fact, in the 40s, when FDR proposed the GI Bill, you know the one group that opposed veterans going to college? College presidents, Deborah, college presidents, from the president of Harvard to the president of Chicago. They said, if you allow these veterans into our universities, our institutions will become academic hobo jungles. That's a quote. Were they bad people? No. They were the products of their own experiences, and they felt only wealthy people should get a college degree, and that people who were not wealthy of any race should, in contrast, get a skill, a trade. Well, within a matter of the passing of that GI Bill, within a matter of 2 to 3 years, a couple of million veterans, still mainly white men, but some women and some blacks had taken advantage of it, and we saw that regular people could do it. And that's why when the 1965 Higher Education Act was passed, we were able to see Americans saying, maybe my kids can go to college. Now, where are we today? We have 2 issues. One, there are other countries that are doing better than we. They've gotten beyond the 30% with college degrees. There are other institutions, countries that talk about the need for 2- and 4-year degrees. We are particularly behind in the STEM areas, an area where we've made quite a bit of progress in that, first of all, on the international math and science competition, we tend to be in that bottom half, sometimes bottom quarter, even with our better prepared students. And having chaired the National Academy's Committee on Underrepresentation, the numbers are really challenging for students of color. What do the numbers say? Well, it didn't surprise us that only 20% of Blacks and Latinos who began with a major in science or engineering graduated with a bachelor's in those areas within 6 years. But we were shocked to find that only 32%, 33% at most of whites, and only 41% of Asians who begin with a major will do so, will graduate with a degree in those areas. And the first response from some people was, well, that's because you can make more money going into something else. And we looked at the data. No, interestingly enough, the higher achieving the student, the more AP credits, the more socially prestigious the university, the greater the possibility the student would leave STEM within the first year or two. And one of the reasons so many people earn below Bs in first year chemistry, first year physics, and those areas. And most important, what it means is that only about 5% of our degrees in our country are given or are earned in the natural sciences and engineering. In Europe, it's over 10%. Now, I'm talking about STEM, but let me say something very quickly. We use a statement that I really like that says, consider the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or. I wish I had been clever enough to say that, Deborah, but it's not me. It's actually Jim Collins from Good to Great. And the point is, it's not STEM or the humanities. Having chaired the Humanities Council, I am one going around saying we need both, that the liberal arts education is more important than ever. When you look at accreditation, even in a professional program like engineering, there's much more emphasis on humanities and social sciences now than ever before. And I'm often, as a mathematician, I'm very quick to let people know math and science are a part of the liberal arts. They go all the way back to the quadrivium. You remember from years ago, and you go back to old times, and you look at what's included, and you look at people like Descartes and others who might be doing math and philosophy and other areas. But the point is, it's the broad education that we want to give our students. And that means that if one is thinking about becoming somebody in technology or in science, we want them to be broadly educated. And I know the faculty at Flint appreciate that. But I would also say, for those who are in the humanities, we want to look at ways that technology can be helpful. So we talk a lot about digital humanities here, and imaging and digital arts, and geographic information systems. And there's a thread of computing plus other areas to give people broadening experiences that will just make them even more marketable. Because one of the issues, some may go to grad school, but most are looking for jobs. And most of my students and yours don't have trust funds. They have to find a job. But there's nothing mutually exclusive between being liberally educated and finding a job, because we should be teaching all of our students the importance of speaking clearly, writing well in standard English, understanding how to work with other people, and the importance of ethical behavior, of seeking the truth. And so there's several things I would want you to think about. Number one, you are involved in your community, and that's so important. One of the things we've done that has been very helpful to us has been to work with the Carnegie classification on community engagement. That is one that we worked on deliberately. We were doing some things, but we needed to have the hard questions asked of us over several years so we could see where we were still not where we needed to be in order to, as a campus, say, this is important to us. We talk about the importance of social justice. We have that in our mission, and we had to go back and forth a lot to get to that point. We are here in the Baltimore area. We may be in the suburban area in Baltimore County, but from my roof, as Deborah knows, we can see downtown Baltimore. And so we do a lot with first generation, not just first generation kids. Between 30 and 40% of our students would be first generation or Pell eligible. We're very proud of that group. And the graduation rates for that group are not different statistically from any other middle class group on the campus. Number two, we work a lot with children in pre-K through 12. And we've got challenges. Any city I go to will tell me about the challenges of its city schools, of its public schools, wherever I go, whether it's Chicago, Philadelphia, or here in Baltimore. And we've got the city and the county schools and all of these, and there are challenges on both sides. And yet we have been determined to build some success. We have started with our MAHA program, which is the one in the 60 Minutes piece that Deborah was talking about. We do lead the country in producing Blacks who go on to complete PhDs in natural sciences and engineering around the country, and MD PhDs. We are only about 20% Black. We have an Asian population, white population, some Latinos. But here's the point I would make, that what we've learned from that one program in STEM has helped us replicate it in other areas, from the humanities to the arts to the social sciences. And we have special programs. If you look at, first of all, my TED Talk, which focuses on success in science, we've now evolved that conversation to go beyond STEM. Because what I say about STEM, I could say about any of the other disciplines. For example, the 4 pillars we talk about: high expectations, not just of students, but of ourselves. What else can we do? How can we change the culture to help more students? Number 2, it takes building community among those students to know how to work together. Collaborative learning is the name of the game when thinking about problem solving. Number 3, and most important, it takes people in the discipline, not just science, not just engineering, but the artists and the humanists and the social scientists to pull people into the work. And number 4, how can we have rigorous qualitative and quantitative evaluation? And that notion has allowed us to build scholars programs around some of our students, but then to learn from those programs what we do to help other students in those disciplines using those same principles that I'm bringing up. And so I want you to think about several questions. You know, it was Hrabowski, the Nobel laureate, who interestingly earned the Nobel Prize in physics in the 40s. He said that when he was growing up, all of his friends' mothers would ask them at the end of a school day, "What'd you learn in school today?" He said, "Not my Jewish mother." He said, "My mother would say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today?" And in my book that my colleagues and I wrote on the Empowered University, it is the notion of being empowered as a university to look in the mirror at self and ask the hard questions. And this is where I hope the conversation will go today. And there are several that I wrote down that I want you to think about. What is the brand of you, Michigan-Flint? What are you most proud of? I know you care about your students. Are you able to demonstrate that caring? And what does that mean? What are the goals for the next level? Is there general consensus that you can be much better? And are we as a community at UMBC or you at Flint willing to have the hard and tough conversations, whether talking about performance of students, challenges with the schools around you, how we look at the data and analytics, having the ability to decide who are the change agents on this campus, what are the challenges we face to moving to the next level. We use the line, success is never final. There's always more to do. And as we look at analytics and we look at performance, while we've had success with certain groups, we know we can be much better than we are. We've taken graduation rates from 30 years ago at 35% up to 70%, and we can account for the other 20% and where they go without saying that they failed out. Many change majors and for a lot of reasons, but we're constantly working to know our students. Do you know your students? Do you know the importance of disaggregating the data? I'm sure you do, but do you appreciate my saying, for example, that Black does not mean Black, that you have Black students from all over the world. You might have them from Jamaica, or you might have them who are inner city, or they may be, quite frankly, from a suburban area. They're not all the same. The same is true with every group, Asian, Latino, whatever the group. There are differences within the group that we have to think about. And then finally, what is the culture of Michigan-Flint? Eric Weiner, who wrote the book, The Geography of Bliss, says that culture is the sea we swim in, so all-consuming that we fail to recognize it until we step out of it and look back at what's there. And so the values we hold, the incentives we give for people to act in certain ways, the rewards, the challenges, and the questions. Who are you, University of Michigan-Flint? And is there some level of consistency? I want to start with 2 stories. The first involves Dr. Kismikia Corbett. We are so proud of her. She's a young woman we recruited to UMBC at age 17 from rural North Carolina and majored in biology and sociology. This wonderful point about the genius of the ant. And she says the sociology, the social sciences have been as important to her as the life sciences. She went on and got a PhD from Chapel Hill back in her home state, then was on the was working as a postdoc and then scientist at NIH. And she, along with Bonnie Graham, are the two who created the vaccine used by both Moderna and Pfizer with the mRNA technology. And one of the things she said that you'll appreciate is that it was the social sciences that taught her that before they could move ahead with the trial, she insisted that Moderna get enough Blacks in the study. And because she said, from what I know about history, if we don't have enough Blacks in the study, they will not trust the vaccine. You have to have it. And it was because of that and her really being passionate with my wife and me that we were in the study, because we understood we needed to speak up and step up and say we believe in science and that there are scientists of all races working on these issues. And it did make a difference. She's now at Harvard. We're very proud of her. But a little young girl from the country, from rural North Carolina. It's a great story. Imagine when I say to people, she's the first Black woman in the world to create a vaccine. That should give us all goosebumps, because it says to any little girl, I can do this. That's number one. Second story, and I'll close with this. Something happened that I never expected. Years ago, Mr. Meyerhoff had started the program. He's an engineer who really was a developer. And his wife, after 60 years, was at Hopkins and was near death. And he wanted to see what was going on. And they took him in and she was there. And all of the doctors were referring to one physician, this well-trained cardiologist, young. And he said, who? And he was the only Black in the room. And they were all deferring to him. And he said, who is this guy? And they gave his credentials. And he said, I want to meet him. He wanted to thank him. And the doctor comes out, shakes his hand, and Bob says, I want to thank you for helping my wife. And with tears, it's hard for me to even tell the story. With tears, this young man says, Mr. Meyerhoff, I'm one of yours. I was a Meyerhoff scholar at UMBC. I wouldn't be here today if you hadn't given me that financial support. And Bob took him and hugged him and cried and said, never occurred to him that one day, one of the kids he was helping would help his wife at that point in her life. And so I challenge us to remember these kids that we're helping, kids and not kids, can do things we haven't even imagined yet. And so I challenge you to watch your thoughts. They become your words become your actions become your habits become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny, dreams and values. University of Michigan-Flint, you are so special with such a special mission. And like us, you can be even better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so if you have questions in the audience, please do just put them in the Q&A, as Nick said. And let me start out with a question of my own.
Yes.
So the institutional transformation that you led at UMBC over the 30 years, what would you say, reflecting back, if it is even possible? And look, no one is going to hold you to it, whether you're right or wrong, because it's your, what would you say was the most challenging one or two things that you had to overcome?
I appreciate that. I always say, and Debbie, you'll appreciate this, first line in this new book, The Empowered University, says, it's not about me, it's about us, because the first challenge was to develop a vision that we could all live to, we could all speak to and believe in. And when we decided to develop this vision of creating first a program in this predominantly white setting that would have more students in general doing well in science and engineering, and particularly to do the better job with those who are at the bottom, typically your students of color, we decided to be with a bold and hairy goal, again, Jim Collins, not just to make sure they could survive, but that they would thrive. And when we chose this idea, let's see if we can't help produce some who would go into the professoriate. most people said out of the question, it will take generations for that to come. And they said, and it won't be happening at UMBC. I should tell you that when I first moved here 35 years ago, became president 30 years ago, UMBC was considered the most racist campus in the state of Maryland. And I'd been in Illinois, but then I had spent time as a provost and dean at an HBCU. And people said, why would you go there? It's so racist. And I said, no, they're people. They're people. We have problems to solve. And I said, they're typical of American higher education. There are challenges. Here was the reason we were called racist. So many kids came here to major in science or engineering. And the best prepared kids may have been making it, but most didn't make it of any race. But almost none of the blacks were making it, you see. They came from different high schools and just not as strong a background. And so people just thought, oh, blacks aren't doing well there. Well, the fact was, all of our students needed more help. We needed to figure out, it wasn't that we didn't have wonderful faculty, but you have to know how to deal with students at certain levels of education. And we had to decide what will be needed in the way of support, depending on the level of preparation of the student. So we used a lot of analytics to help us figure out level of support needed and in what disciplines might they make it. Okay, so we had to understand the students and their backgrounds better, and to know simply having a PhD in math doesn't mean you're ready to teach kids who don't know pre-calculus. We had to figure out how low could we go, what could we expect, how long would it take somebody to do it in engineering. And so we can tell you now that if a student starts with below a strong pre-calculus course, it's almost impossible for that student to become an engineer in 5 or 6 years, just because of what's needed. Math is sequentially based. I study French. You don't start speaking fluently. You go from fundamentals and you build on, and it takes layers, you know. So it was that kind of understanding of the issues that was very important. And then finally, I would say, we needed to believe in ourselves. We were at that time an outgrowth of the larger campus from 50 years ago. And so the mindset was about the larger campus. And we needed to decide who we were and what we stand for and what our strengths are. And it was really important. And I used this metaphor. I said, I grew up being told by the world I was second class. I am not going to be second class to anybody. And we want people here who are not going to be second class. We can be different with a different role to play. But we need to decide what we can do and do well, and to focus on excellence for that. And it was getting colleagues who agree with me to come together to say, this is our brand. This is we like being nerdy. Let me just tell you that. We're not big sports. We had that great win in 2018 with UVA, but that was really, it won't happen again in my lifetime. No, UVA has $8-9 billion. For us to beat them by 20 points. And I will tell you, we added to the brand. Anytime we have something that helps our brand, we add it. So the two things the basketball players said after the game with national sports, he said, what are you going to do now? One kid said, I've got to go back to my room and study. We took that and put it everywhere. After winning that historic game, we're back to study. And the other kid said something that really made tears come to my eyes. He said it with tears, we stand on the shoulders of our chess team. And he was serious. And America said, what? A basketball player admiring a chess player? Well, we're very good at chess, all right? But we chose these things that could give us niche areas. Model UN, chess, CyberDog, those kinds of areas. And so getting people to think that way, that was the challenge. Mindset, that's what I'm saying. Do you believe in yourselves? That's the question every university must ask.
Thank you. We have a few questions. The first one is from Professor Hiba Wibi Alma. She's from School of Nursing. And she says, first of all, thank you for the very inspiring presentations. She has two questions, and I'm going to read one first. After you answer, read the second.
Yes. You
mentioned several books in your talk today. What are the 2 books you absolutely recommend for us to read?
I appreciate that. And it sounds self-serving, but my last 2 books are books I'm using with universities around the country, and I don't get any of the money. Let me say that, so it's not self-serving that way. One is The Empowered University, and the subtitle is Shared Leadership, Culture Change, and Academic Success. And that really does focus on looking in the mirror itself. The other book focuses on how we develop our philosophy about education. The other book actually has a photo of the HIV virus on the front, the three-dimensional structure of HIV. And it has one of our leading scientists who also is leading in producing kids of color and women who go on to PhDs in biochemistry. It has a Black student and a Korean student, Korean American student. And it's a very controversial topic cover because it's called Holding Fast to Dreams. But the controversy comes because people wanted to know, why didn't I put a person of color as the professor on there? And it allows me to make this statement. The power in many disciplines is still in the hands primarily of white men, and many want to help with these issues. So it can't just be minorities helping minorities. We have to get people in the professoriate who are willing to help. And that's, I mean, of all races, anybody can make a difference. And I wanted to make, so those are the two books. But what I will tell you that sounds a little different that you might appreciate. When my students talk to me and they're techies, they want to be the engineer or the doctor, I'm saying, and they're saying, what's the best thing to read? I tell them to read novels. And they ask, why? Why read novels? I said, because you get to know about human behavior. And one of the challenges we face in our society, whether you're a scientist or an artist, is how do we understand human behavior? So beyond the professional books, I'm reading French novels right now, and it's très difficile, but I'm reading them and it teaches me French culture and the language. And so I'm always encouraging us to read professionally the kind of books I just mentioned, but also to look at novels for our students to read. Most college students graduate and they've never read a novel. That may sound crazy, but I'm telling you, I see it all the time. We are always working to get students to read literature more.
Okay, and the second part of our question is, would you agree that if students successfully complete their first year, then they are more likely to stay through graduation, and therefore more effort should be invested in this area, the first year retention?
Yes, no, first year retention is critical. She is absolutely correct. And what I would say is, and the one caveat is, the question is, what are the first year courses? If the student is only taking some developmental courses, then we've got to get them through the first year of regular courses in order to see even more of a higher probability of success. Sometimes people are in developmental work and they do fairly well, and then they get out of it and they still can't do the first year of the work. So there are two issues. One would be if they're in first year of regular work and they make it through that first year, they're on their way. Number two, though, if they're taking a lot of developmental courses, still got to keep watching them very carefully. But the investment for graduation, retention, and enrollment should be on those lower levels. Now, the one other point we make is if students are trying to major in STEM and they earn C's in the first year of chemistry or physics or any of those areas, we strongly encourage them to retake the courses, because the analytics that we have done, the work has shown that students who earn C's in the first year of STEM tend not to make it to graduation. They don't have a strong enough background. We see that B as being critical, and we have worked to redesign courses. If you get a chance, look at our CDC. That's not for disease. That's the Chemistry Discovery Center. We do a lot there and in first year of work in STEM areas to redesign courses. And we've got innovation grants that we give. If you look at they're called Hrabowski Innovation Grants. For my 20th anniversary, they raised quite a bit of money to have an endowment to give faculty a chance to rethink how we teach certain courses. So the first year work in that, very important.
Thank you, thank you. Here's a question from Veronica Robinson. Does your organization utilize holistic admissions?
We do, but let me just be honest with you, no. Given that almost 55–60% of our students are in STEM, and given the challenges of helping students make it in STEM, we do expect a certain level of performance. The typical student here might be different from yours in that the typical GPA would be 3.6, 3.7. And test scores are optional now, but to put it in perspective, average score for minorities would probably be in the 1200. So it's a better prepared student, it is. However, let me say this, we do take students who have much less than that, and we work very closely with them in special programs and can show the results of that. So, and the advantage we may have is the Baltimore-Washington corridor. We get students from the New York to DC area, and we in both ways. It's very important to say this. We are an economic engine for this region, which is what we have in common with you. I want to say that. And most important, we have a park on campus where we've got a lot of companies where students work. But it is holistic. It's not just test scores, not just grades. We do look at other factors. We look at something I call fire in the belly. Student may not have as strong an academic background, but if we can, and we do get interviews and an opportunity to interview a lot of students, fire in the belly, that makes a big difference. Let me give you one example of fire in the belly. When a student goes K-12 and has never missed a day of school, even when the test score is lower, you got a special student. Because we know in more disadvantaged environments, people miss school a lot. When you consider the student just gets there, it may not be what we call a traditional measure, but it says there's something special about that student. So we do have ways, and then when students have overcome different obstacles, we take those things into account also. Having worked on questions for the SAT, I do know you can get some sense about ability to do word problems or read a passage. So I don't just discount those tests, but they are, at this point, they're test optional, which means we have to do even more work to look at the skills level of a student before deciding if the student has a reasonable chance of succeeding at the university. And because we have so many K-12 initiatives, I want to say one of the things I think any institution focused on a particular area or region has to figure out ways, regardless of the problems of school systems, to work with teachers and with children and with families. My first two books were on raising smart Black boys in science, second one, raising smart Black girls in science. And those are still books that people get that talk about roles of families and schools, beating the odds and overcoming the odds. But I will tell you, the work we do in the upward bound programs, including general upward bound and math science upward bound, if you look at the UMBC Lakeland Consortium, those are inner city middle schools that we work with. And then look at the Sherman Scholars Program, which is modeled after Mile, but it's for students who will become teachers, either in pre-K through 3 or middle school math teachers. And we've raised money for those. Those are examples of working to strengthen teaching and learning in the schools so that we can have more students coming from challenging schools who can come to UMBC.
Okay, we have a question from Lori Vedder, who is our interim vice provost for enrollment management. Lori is asking, how involved were and are your faculty in driving some of the discussions, support, and how involved are they in creating the data support services? Is it strictly reliant on advisors and other campus leaders, or are the faculty deeply involved?
It's a very good question. So we always will have staff who are involved, but what has made the difference with our enrollment is that through shared governance, we have many more faculty who involve themselves. If we want to have an impact on communities and on schools, we need the prestigious expertise of faculty with that of professional staff. We need both. And so some of our very best faculty, and we do have a number who are quite productive in scholarly ways, who are also involved, though, not just in the strong teaching, but in service. And so writing grants has been one major strategy. So our history department does fabulous work in historical research on public policy, also has written grants to retrain, re-educate teachers to go beyond Western civilization over the past 15, 20 years, to teach them about things in global studies, and Asian studies, and African studies in those areas. And so grants, stipends, and things to work with teachers. Similarly, we have work involving infusing engineering into the schools over there, and grants from the state and from the federal government in that area. We do a lot with girls in computing, middle school and summer programs and others with girls in those areas. The upward bound programs have been really helpful for low-income kids to get more ready. And sometimes they're still not prepared to come to UMBC, but we can get them to the right institution that can help them, maybe a community college. We also have written a lot of grants to work between us and community colleges, because that's another place we get the enrollment. But make no mistake about it, if somebody asks me as a president of 30 years, what I see as the biggest challenges in higher ed. Number one would be to make sure that we're clear about whom we serve and how well we serve them. So enrollment, enrollment, enrollment. Without the enrollment, no institution can be healthy. Got to find ways to build enrollment. To do that, the entire university community has to be involved. And that means that a part of the enlightenment has to be that professors are working with staff to work with partnerships in that community. If you're really serving that region, how strong are the partnerships? How layered are they in terms of the people from the faculty, from the staff, from the students, working with those different partners on the outside? Very important.
Okay, so this one is a question from Susan Gano-Phillips. She's the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. She's actually on sabbatical, but thanks to Zoom, she is attending the lecture. So she thanks you for your very insightful presentations. And her question is that she's very interested in the statement that you developed a campus vision that was central to your success of transforming UMBC. So can you speak a bit more about the mechanisms you used to develop and coalesce around a shared campus vision, as well as how the governance processes and relations among administrators, faculty, and staff contributed to the shared vision?
Excellent, excellent. From the early years, we needed to decide how we would be distinct from other institutions in our state. And we worked on the needs of the state, the needs of this Baltimore-Washington corridor, the greater Baltimore area, and looked at potential employers, but also at the needs, the challenges. And we looked at all those things in relationship to what we were already doing. And we became very clear we couldn't be all things to all people. And while we have PhD programs, they're not in all disciplines. And we had to make some very hard decisions, but we talk about specific areas in science and engineering, and then broad areas in language, literacy, and culture, but without PhDs in the traditional English, history, and those kind of areas. Faculty in the humanities feed into those programs. And we did that because we had to say, where can we have the greatest impact on this broad region and the challenges? Some of it had to do with immigrants and were people coming from other countries because of this area. But the idea of focusing on culture broadly, using the humanities was a part of it. But even in the sciences, not to be all things to all people. You've got College Park and Hopkins, who are both doing a lot of theoretical physics. We do apply. We're very involved in the environment, for example, with national agencies. And the idea is that, so we have, if you look at our vision statement, you'll see that uniqueness about what we talk about, what we do, that also speaks volumes about what we may not do. And secondly, we did want the notion of social justice to be, and those were some serious conversations with a lot of people who had different points of view, but we finally came to the point that, no, given the challenges we face, given that the problems that we have in the Baltimore area, we had to speak to those things. And so if you look at that mission statement and our vision, you will see that. But we spent a number of years on both strategic planning every few years, evolving that process, led by our provost, with faculty leaders together, with my serving in many ways as a devil's advocate to a lot of things. And most important, listening to the voices of our students and faculty and staff, and having our faculty senate and staff senate and students, leaders, they're involved in the process. And so we've always had hundreds of people involved in that process. And we did our last big plan at the same time that we were going through accreditation, so that we could look at both self-studies at the same time. And it allowed us to know ourselves better and to think about creative ways of going to the next level. And just one or two of the things, because we have science, we needed to do a much better job of helping most students succeed. Number two, we still were thinking either your science or your humanities. We needed to think about ways of connecting those disciplines. Number three, about how technology should be across the board, about how we use technology in the classroom and beyond, about the use of data-driven decision-making, and about becoming more inclusive. And that meant writing grants to help us bring in more women in certain disciplines, more people of color. Are we where we need to be? No, but we've made a lot of progress. But it was that robust conversation, that set of conversations about gender and race and other ways of diversity and LGBTQ and getting it all out on the table and seeing what people were thinking. And of all the things I could say, having what we call retriever courage, the name of our dog, the Chesapeake Bay Retriever, is True Grit. And we talk about retriever courage as the courage to listen even when we don't like what people are saying. Retriever courage. We've used that in Title IX discussions all the way over to social justice protests. Very important.
Thank you. John Girdwood's question is answered. The next question is Kate Harmon. She's a student, a doctoral student in the Ed Leadership Program. She's talking about the hidden costs in higher education. Hidden costs as in costs related, fees for student organization, recreational sports, fraternity and sorority involvement. So these kind of costs that the students are burdened with when they come to college.
Sure.
How do you suggest that institutions address this such that there is a pathway for all students, not only the ones who can pay?
Sure. I would say several things. Number one, we're always working to fundraise to have more money for different populations of students, from women's center and women over 25 to students of color to first generation college students. There are numbers of sources, federal sources that can work on, and we've worked on a lot of that. But number two, and we've had this discussion recently, because we're such a nerdy campus, and I'm a nerd, so I'm not saying that derogatorily. There are students who would say, why are we putting all this money into athletics? And we don't, I've been the one to say we won't have football. No, we are Division I in basketball and others. There is a level of campus activity that adds to the culture and helps more students to want to be there. Recruitment and retention. And it is the American way in higher education that these activities, these student organizations and others, very important. And then a student who is not involved would say, but why must I pay that? Because it's a part of what we call the public good. It's for the good of the university. And as I've said to colleagues and others sometimes, we want to be respectful of everybody's point of view. We don't want to go overboard with athletics or anything else. We want to make sure academics will come first. But students have chances to get funding from student fees for a number of organizations. So we are very proud that we beat Yale in Model UN this year. Big deal, big deal, big deal. I'm sorry, I don't mean Model UN, I mean mock trial. We did well in Model UN, but right. And I say that because these groups, these organizations get money. Well, when they win, they help us bring in more students. So it's a part of recruitment and retention. What I would say to the student at different levels is the university, I know we do this and others too, should be working to give people ways of paying for their education. That's that way. We're not going to take away those fees, but we really do work to partner with the larger community to give people opportunities for paid internships. My students don't want just, they want paid internships. They don't have trust funds, no. And at the undergrad level through grad, we need to be finding ways of helping them pay for their education. Students need to see we care and we're finding ways to help them pay for it. But the American higher education system does believe in this broad co-curricular fee structure to help with the public good.
So I know we are at time, but I do want to ask one question for myself, and that is, public university leaders, you and me, we have to work a lot with the legislature,
yes,
with the city council, the mayor's office, and so on and so forth. Have you seen a change in your 30 years that these used to be more difficult, it's easier now, or used to be easier 30 years ago, is much more difficult now? How do you think that has evolved?
It really does depend on the state. We hear about your state, just being honest, and you've got fine institutions and you have some challenges, you know that. We are much more fortunate. We have more of a bipartisan governor and Democratic Republican governor, which is unusual for us, and a Democratic legislature, but they work well together. And the elected officials believe in not just pre-K through 12, but in the very important role of higher education in building the economy of this region and the state. And so we're getting more money this year than I've seen in my 35 years, 45 years in this state, quite frankly. Now, the Speaker of the House, this is one last inspiring story, is a young Black woman who came here when there were very few Blacks here, but we treated her right when she was here. She's now the first woman and first Black head of the Maryland House of Delegates, most powerful woman in the legislature. And she believes in higher education. And we've had $1 billion in construction of this past couple of days because the elected officials like Delegate Adrian Jones, they really believe in it. You know, one of our challenges is to create people who either want to be elected officials or who want to elect elected officials who believe in education. That is the challenge of our universities, to find people who will believe in what we see as important. And so it depends on the state. It really does. We know that the closer the relationship between universities and the legislature, and the more respect they have for universities, the more supportive they are in investing in those institutions. And that's got to be the challenge each of us has as we think about a state or a university. Very important.
Well, Dr. Hrabowski, Freeman, my friend, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us today. I know you are going to step away from the leadership, but I know you for a fact will be deeply engaged in higher education in different forms. So thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you sometime in the neighborhood if opportunities allow.
I appreciate it, Deborah. Congratulations to you on your role and to your University of Michigan-Flint. My challenge to all of you and to all of us, we must be ambassadors for higher education. We cannot let the media tell us that it's not valuable. Who knows of a family where some people have gone to college and others say, we don't want to do that. Once they see what the education can do, not just in terms of money and jobs, but in living one's life, quality of life, they want that for their children and their spouses. And so I challenge us all to be ambassadors for education. And as I say to my colleagues, keep hope alive, to keep hope alive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.